Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to your tour. My name is Jake. I'm going to be your ghost tour guide this evening. A couple things I just want to get out of the way, some ground rules. There's going to be no drinking, no smoking, no vaping on this tour, as well as please no videography. Flash photography, absolutely totally okay. I will encourage you to take pictures at every opportunity. Please no videography, thank you very much. As well, just a little pointer for you. Right now we're standing on bricks. We're going to be walking over some cobblestones later on in the tour. They're uneven surfaces, so if you're worried about tripping, please watch your step. Also watch your step. I don't know if you've noticed, Colonial Williamsburg's got a bunch of horses running around, carrying horse-drawn carriages, and some of you may be familiar with this. Horses tend to poop a whole lot, and they are also notoriously very difficult to potty train. So they may have left a couple presents for us on our path. Just be on the lookout for that. Anyway, folks, we're here in Colonial Williamsburg, one of the first colonial settlements in North America, but long before the colonists ever made landfall, this land was lived and died in by the Powhatan Native American tribes. And once the colonists did get here, of course, they died off in droves due to plague, famine, all sorts of other problems. And then come the Revolutionary War. Parts of this town was used for a military hospital during the Battle of Yorktown, and then during the Civil War and the Battle of Williamsburg, many people died of their injuries here. And then, of course, in the 20th century, in the 20th century, Spanish flu tore through the United States in a way that will be eerily familiar to those of us who have survived the COVID-19 pandemic. And, of course, thousands of native Williamsburgers died and were buried here. And with all those dead and buried, it's no wonder that this is one of the most haunted cities in Virginia. And I hope to show you how. And our first stop is that way. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see behind me, we are now at the Precious Gem. Today it's a jewelry store, but it didn't always used to be that way. It used to be the home of a man named Thomas Moore. Now, Thomas Moore was this big, tall man with a big, bushy mustache, and he was what they called at the time a dandy. So he would always walk around with his coattails, with a top hat, very fancy, very well done. But he was, how should I say this? If we're being very charitable to Mr. Moore, we would call him a ladies' man. If we're being maybe less charitable to Thomas Moore, we would call him a womanizer. He was always seen with any number of cadre of women on his arm. He would never leave the house without one. And at one point, the woman that he's chosen to have on his arm is a woman named Constance Hall. Now, Miss Constance Hall, fantastic. She's the total package. She's got the looks. She's a beautiful woman. She's got the smarts. By all accounts, she is educated and eloquent, and she's got the money. Very, very important. Unfortunately, she does have the one thing that you really don't want your lover to have. Can anybody guess what that is? It's a husband. The crowd's gonna, oh, a husband. Yes, you're right. He did have a husband, Mr. Hall. Now, of course, at the time of their little affair, Thomas Moore and Constance Hall, their affair, Mr. Hall was overseas on a business trip. So they were not particularly discreet about their affair. They were seen walking arm in arm all through Williamsburg. They were seen eating together. They were seen going into and out of each other's houses at all hours of the day and night, which at the time, absolutely a scandal, right? The rumor mill is going crazy. The gossip in this small town, that's all anyone's talking about. So 3 months pass, and eventually Mr. Hall returns home, and he barely even makes it to his front door where somebody says, "Have you heard about Constance and Thomas Moore?" So as soon as he gets to his front door, he throws his bags down. He marches right up to this building right here. He kicks down the door. He finds Thomas Moore in his own home, and he beats him to death. Beats him to death just over and over. Once they found the body, eventually, I'll get there in a second. Once they found the body, they described him as beaten beyond recognition. I don't know if any of you have ever been mad enough to beat somebody beyond recognition, but it's hard work, right? So when it came time to hide the body, he couldn't lift him. Mr. Hall couldn't lift Thomas Moore. So Mr. Hall finds his wife. He finds Constance and says, "Constance, I need you to help me hide this body." So the two of them, they take his body, they lift him up, they bring him down into the basement, they toss him down the stairs, they exit through the door of Thomas Moore's house arm in arm. And of course, everybody sees this now, right? So a couple days pass, and nobody's seen Thomas Moore in a little while. So they alert the police, or the constable, I suppose, and the constable approaches Thomas Moore's house, and he finds that the door's been kicked down. And at the time, it's the summertime, and Williamsburg gets really warm in the summer. So by the time he enters the house, he can smell what happened, more or less, I feel like. So he starts asking people questions. He says, "Hey, when's the last time you saw Thomas Moore?" They say, well, last time we saw him was the day that Mr. and Mrs. Hall walked out of his house. Why do you ask? And the constable says, oh, nothing. Don't want to cause a panic, right? So the two of them, the Halls, they are charged with murder, of course, and in the most noble thing that he could possibly do, I think, Mr. Hall throws himself on the mercy of the court. He says, do anything you wish with me, as long as you don't charge Constance. She's an innocent woman. And they do. They do what they will with him. They let Constance go. He is sent to prison, obviously, for murder. He spends 8 years in prison before he dies there. For Constance's part, her name, her reputation is absolutely slandered, and she skips town and is never heard from again. But Thomas More has made, over the years, many, many appearances. As he was in life, as in death, as in life, he is a ladies' man to this day. So he most often appears for women. He is more likely to speak to women. He's more likely to appear as an apparition for women. Much more than men, of course. You know, he's got his priorities straight, you know? To the people he often appears to employees here at the Precious Gem. One time, the manager of the Precious Gem here, she was closing up shop. She was just like hanging up the clothes sign, and she sees a man tapping at the window. Tap, tap, tap. This man with like bushy mustache, top hat, coat tails, the whole 9 yards. She says, sir, we're closed, you can't come in. Tap, tap, tap. She goes again, she says, sir, we're closed. And she walks over and looks him in the eyes, and she sees this deathly pale man, and she can sort of see through him almost, and as soon as she recognizes that, he vanishes, he fades into mist. And then again, he appears at that building down there. He appears, it used to be a bookstore, it used to be the William and Mary bookstore, that white building with the brick down there. One time again, the manager of that bookstore, back when it was a bookstore, she was closing up shop, and she hears somebody rummaging through the book section. She comes outside and says, sir, you can't be in here right now. It's this tall man, bushy mustache, top hat, coattails, full thing. And he looks up, locks eyes with her, and vanishes. Now, that building over there is no longer a bookstore. That building is now a Lululemon, and I'm sure Thomas More is thrilled. Our next stop, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be just down that way. Ladies and gentlemen, just behind me here is Bruton Parish Church. It's a little bit of a tongue twister for me, sorry about that. And Bruton Parish Church is one of the oldest churches in the United States. It was attended by George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and has been in operation almost continuously all the way up until the COVID-19 pandemic, when it did unfortunately have to shut its doors for a little bit of time. Now, way back in the times of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, people didn't tend to get buried in cemeteries like the one that you see off to my right. They tended to get buried in family plots elsewhere in the state on family-owned land, sometimes miles and miles away from the church where they attend. And this was a real pain for Mr. Reverend Jones. Now, Reverend Jones would have to, because he would be their reverend, and he would have to go far, far, far afield into the state, off to their family land to perform their funeral, on land far away from the church where they would actually attend. And he thought this was a big pain, so he decided with his wife, the love of his life, his wife, they would be buried at the church. And his wife was like, perfect. And these two, absolute match made in heaven. They were complete soulmates. They were madly, madly, madly in love. And one day, unfortunately, Mrs. Jones gets sick. She gets very, very badly sick. She's bedridden for weeks. And she calls her husband to him. She says, my love, I have but one thing to ask of you. And he says, of course, my love, anything. She says, my love, I ask that you never marry, you never remarry, you never marry another woman. And he says, of course, my love, I would never love anybody nearly so much as I love you. And she smiles, and she dies in her bed. A couple days later. Now, almost immediately, she's buried, and then in the cemetery, her ghost starts appearing. She's, idly wandering, maybe whispering, singing, whistling, singing a little song. She seems happy and amicable, and she's not malevolent in any way. As her husband goes to make her resting place proper, what she needs is a headstone. Now, here's my geology major coming in here, folks. The soil and the ground here in Williamsburg is very, very, so there's a layer of dirt, that's the soil layer, and then below that is lots and lots of clay. What we don't have in Williamsburg is very much stone. In order to get stone, you have to go either further west or further north. And so in order to get a headstone suitable for his wife's burial, Reverend Jones has to go north. And so he goes up north, makes a long trek in a horse-drawn carriage, and he comes back and he's got her headstone. Does anybody know what else he brings back with him? Any guesses? Any guesses? Another wife. That's right, another wife. Merely weeks after promising his beloved that he would never ever remarry, he returns to his home and her deathbed with another woman. Now, naturally, this upsets the ghost of Mrs. Jones, and she stops singing and whistling and starts sobbing. Starts racking sobs get heard all throughout the night coming from the cemetery. And of course, that's her spirit. Now, when Reverend Jones dies, Reverend Jones and his second wife, rather, the second Mrs. Jones, far younger than both Reverend Jones and the first Mrs. Jones, I would like to say. When the two of them die, in Reverend Jones's will, he describes how he would like to be buried. He says in his will, "I would like to be buried next to," in the name of his second wife. He does not mention his first wife at all. So he is buried next to his second wife. His first wife, allegedly the love of his life, who he has just completely turned his back on, is left completely in the cold. Metaphorically speaking, of course. But her spirit still probably pretty PO'd, if you ask me, still haunts the cemetery and this church to this day. In life, she was the church organist, so if you are playing the organ and she does not think you are playing the organ very well, she will fling prayer books from the shelves, or not fling, but knock them over and they will land with a loud thunk, and you can still see her sobbing and pacing in the cemetery to this day. Now, for a little bit more of a spooky, gory story, if you follow me this way, I'll tell you a story about Civil War soldiers and an insane surgeon. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here we are on the site of what used to be the Williamsburg Baptist Church. Now, this church is no longer here. It was not restored during the larger scale restoration of colonial Williamsburg during the 1930s. But at the time of its existence, it served many different roles as a military hospital during the Battle of Yorktown in the Revolutionary War, and then during the Battle of Williamsburg in the Civil War. Now, the Civil War was, of course, one of the bloodiest wars in history, certainly in U.S. history. This is the bloodiest war in U.S. history. And a big contributor of that is the ammo that was being fired. Now, prior to the Civil War, an appropriate era rifle, you would take a bag of powder, you would cram it down the barrel of your rifle, and then you would load something called a musket ball. Now, a musket ball, what essentially that is a little lead ball that you would shoot out of your gun, and it would stay this tiny little dense lead ball, and it would go into your skin and hurt a whole lot, and probably take you out of a fight. If it got you in the head or the lungs or the heart, it would kill you. During the Civil War, humans did what they do best and came up with a new, fun, creative way of killing each other known as the mini-A ball. Now, mini-A ball is spelled M-I-N-I accent E ball, where a musket ball traditionally was just a sort of round thing. It was almost like a fist, and so if it got you, it would just punch you and just pierce your skin and typically hit a bone or something like that. And it could be pretty easily pried out by surgeons with just like pliers or forceps or something, reaching in there, grabbing the ball, taking it out, patching you up, and hoping that you don't die of gangrene. Now, the mini-A ball was a little bit different. It was round in the front, just like a normal musket ball, but it was concave in the back. This not only made it cheaper, but it also made it a lot more damaging. So it used less lead, so it was cheaper, and by having the concave back, so imagine this is something that you're shooting at, and here's the mini-A ball. It's going very, very fast, very quickly. It's been fired out of a gun. Oops, sorry. I'm going to do that. Sorry, minor technical difficulties. Now, imagine this is something you're shooting at, and imagine this is your mini-A ball. Mini-A ball fires very, very quickly out of your gun towards whatever you're shooting at. It makes contact. The first part does, and then the back part keeps moving. It folds outwards and flattens. What this means is it would either splinter into lots of small pieces, small shrapnel, but more importantly, it would flatten and create a much bigger surface area with a lot of that force being applied. What does that mean? What that means is where before you would get shot with a musket ball and it was like getting shot with a very big BB gun that hurt a whole lot, before you get shot with a mini-A ball, smack. It expands, it flattens, it makes this giant hole about this big through whatever it hits. So if it gets you in the head, essentially your head explodes, right? If it gets you in the chest, you've got a big hole all the way through your chest. If it got you there, you were dead instantly. You were one of the lucky ones. If it got you in an extremity, if it got you in an arm, in a leg, you would now have this gaping wound in your arm or your leg. And the surgeons, they couldn't just take out the ball, they couldn't just take out the mini-A ball because it had flattened and shattered and everything else. The entire limb couldn't be saved. So what they would have to do is amputate. Now, these amputations, they typically didn't take very long. They would slice through your skin all the way down to the bone, and then they would get out the bone saw. And over the course of about 5 minutes, they would saw back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, all the way through your bone, take your arm, throw it out into a pile, Just a pile of limbs outside every military hospital. They would patch you up, and again, they would hope you didn't die from gangrene. That is if you didn't already die during the amputation. The actual process of amputation, there was about a 77% survival rate, so about a 1 in 4 chance that about 1 in 4 people died, which on paper seems pretty good, but in terms of medicine is absolutely terrifying, completely abominable. And then, of course, there were complications with gangrene, and very many of these people who got their arms amputated did not survive. Now here at Williamsburg Baptist Church, the survival rate was much, much lower. The survival rate was about 33% of amputations. And the reason for that was because the head doctor, the surgeon at the time, was a sadist. Now, at the time, nobody thought that the Civil War would go on as long or be as bloody as it was. At the start of the war, the Union Army boasted 98 surgeons. By the end, they boasted 11,000. Now, I'm not going to say that those 10,900 surgeons all got their medical degree. They probably just let whoever said they were willing to go out there and start amputating people. And certainly that's the case for this man. This man, known as the head devil by soldiers, he was a sadist. He took pleasure in watching these men lose their limbs. He took pleasure in watching them scream under the knife. There are reports of all shapes and colors of people reporting that they were having been shot in one arm and getting their leg amputated, or getting shot in one arm and getting the other arm amputated, and then, oops, we got amputated the wrong arm, gotta do the other one too. The head devil was so dangerous that the pile of limbs, which was situated right over there, at the time that the church was operating as a medical tent, the pile of limbs that was just right over there would be as tall as a man, like 6 or 7 feet tall, of just rotting limbs there. And now by the time the Civil War's over, of course, the man who took so many of these people's limbs, of course people remembered him. They remembered this head devil, this crazed man who would just chop the limbs off of these young soldiers. But they could never find him. He vanished as soon as the war was over. But the soldiers didn't vanish. Those soldiers who died on the operating table didn't vanish. The people in colonial Williamsburg, especially those who are staying here in our various buildings that are rented out as hotels, they occasionally report seeing Civil War reenactors super late at night. And so they call the tourism office or whatever, and they call and they say, hey, are you guys having a Civil War reenactment here super late at night? It's 11:30. Why are there people out there? They're digging on the lawn or something. Of course, the tourism office says, no, we don't do Civil War reenactments. We have colonial reenactments. That's what those people in the powdered wigs are. But we don't do Civil War reenactments, and we don't do reenactments without an audience. That's when when the guests tend to look out their window, notice that all these men, some of them are wearing blue uniforms of the Union, some of them are wearing the khaki uniforms of the Confederacy, but they're all young men, and they're all limping or walking with crutches or missing arms or something, and they're all pawing at this one spot on the ground. That spot on the ground right over there is where they dumped all of these limbs. These men had their limbs stolen from them by the head devil, and they just want them back. And they'll never get them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you'll come with me down this way, we'll go towards the Governor's Palace. It's a very beautiful building here on Colonial Williamsburg. I'll tell you a much, much more recent and scarier story than that. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Governor's Palace of Williamsburg. During colonial times, this place served as the seat of government and the sort of confluence of lots of political power here in Virginia before the capital was moved down to Richmond. But what's most important for you and I today is the hedge maze situated just to the left of it there. Now, this hedge maze is beautifully maintained. It's it's a beautiful hedge maze. You've been in them before. They're fairly standard. It's this beautiful little assortment of hedgerows. But the way it's relevant to this story I'm about to tell you is it is involved in a juvenile college tradition here at the College of William and Mary, just down the road, known as the triathlon. Now, as you would expect, the triathlon has 3 events. Event number 1 is streaking the Sunken Garden. The Sunken Garden is a stretch of fields that I'll show those of you who are on the extended tour. I'll show you the Sunken Garden. I won't streak it for you. That costs extra. Event number 2 is swimming in the Crimdell. The Crimdell is this very pretty looking, very gross smelling sort of lake pond type situation that we have on campus. It's very gross to swim in. I wouldn't recommend it. Event number 3 is hopping the wall of the Governor's Palace and making it from one end of the hedge maze out to the other. Now, of course, most students do this under cover of darkness, which of course does make it trespassing, which I figure, maybe that's part of the fun. I haven't done it myself, I wouldn't know. But regardless, sometime in the 70s, or maybe 80s, this is a bit of an urban legend that I'm telling you. The timetable on this is uncertain. But sometime around then, these two students, they're on a date. And they decide that they want some alone time, if you understand me. A little bit of alone time. They figure, hey, why not? Let's kill two birds with one stone. Let's complete part of the triathlon. Let's hop the governor's palace wall. And then let's go do our alone time activities in the hedge maze. So, it's a boy and a girl. Girl says, gets to the wall. Girl says, hey, boost me over. Boy says, of course, babe. Boosts her over, gets her over the wall. He hears a gasp and a thud. He says, babe, are you okay? Doesn't hear anything back. He says again, babe, are you okay? Doesn't hear anything back. And then he gets over the wall, and it's pitch dark. It's pitch dark, it's in the middle of the night, because of course, that's the only time when there aren't security guards. And so he lands, he can't see anything, and he lands in a puddle. He falls over, lands in a puddle. And of course he's scared now. So he gets out his flashlight and looks around. What he's landed in is a puddle of blood, and sitting next to him is the body of his date, with her throat slit. Now, of course, he screams, and then the security guards come. Security guards take in the scene, and they alert the police, and the police alert the other authorities involved, and then those authorities alert the public that a man has escaped from Eastern State, the Eastern State Mental Hospital at the time is what it was called. Not to be confused with the Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. The Eastern State Mental Hospital is a facility about 5 miles down that way. Its goal is primarily the containment, but then also the rehabilitation of the dangerously insane. Now, one of their charges, wards, prisoners, whatever you'd like to call them, one of them, this big guy, he escaped and then found a gardening sickle, like a little hand scythe. He escaped. I suspect that he had killed before being admitted to the mental facility, and then he found the earliest implement of harm that he could, and then he killed again the first person he could find. He was recaptured, of course. And, well, he might not have been recaptured. Here's the thing about this story, folks. A lot of the stories that I tell you, there's verifiable truth to them. Constance Hall really existed. Thomas More really existed. Reverend Jones really existed. We have accounts of the head devil. There's not so much of an account of this mystery escapee or these two mystery college students who were killed. But, folks, every legend, even the far-fetched ones, has a kernel of truth to them. Colonial Williamsburg is, after all, a form of theme park. And if you've gone to a theme park, especially, this is what I call the Disneyland effect. Nobody ever dies on site at Disneyland. They're taken to a hospital and pronounced dead off-site. Theme parks have a way of covering up tragedies. And I suspect that's what happened to the tragic death of this poor girl. And the identity of the man who killed her is still unknown. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you let me take you down just this way, we'll finish up the tour. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our tour. Thank you so much for coming on that ride with me. If you enjoyed your tour, please, I encourage you, give me a 5-star review on TripAdvisor, on Yelp, anywhere you can. And please do drop my name in there. My name is Jake if you liked your tour. And if you didn't like your tour, I will remind you that my name is Brian. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. And for you who are watching my audition tape, thank you so much for giving me your time. Bye.